The Second Industrial Revolution. Steam and electricity have conquered time and space to a greater extent during the last 60 years than all the preceding 600 years, gushed a special issue of the Illustrated London News in 1897. Yet in 1850, most people knew little about the Industrial Revolution. Outside Britain and a few limited areas in the West, more people still lived in the countryside than in the cities, and more worked at home or in home workshops than in factories. Most had never set foot in a railway car. Even in the cities, people probably made their living as much as their parents had as helpers in shops, domestics, artisans, merchants, and day laborers. By 1914, this scenario had changed so drastically that even Britain had been left behind. Between 1850 and 1870, the coal mines, iron foundries, textile factories, steam engines, and railroads that had made Britain an industrial giant spread broadly into Western and Central Europe and North America. After 1870, new inventions, manufacturing processes, and methods for getting products to market and selling them rendered the earlier milestones of industrializations out of date. Science, technology, and industry marched hand in hand. Large-scale factories dwarfed the textile mills and iron foundries of the early industrial era, and huge department stores displayed endless goods to entice consumers. For the first time in history, people began to expect continuing economic growth. According to some historians, these developments created a second industrial revolution. The lure of shopping. With the all-new technology, manufacturing habitually churned out more products than they could sell. So, merchants found new ways to create consumer demand. Grandiose department stores such as the Bon Marché in Paris and Bocconi's in Milan rose up in major cities across the West. The stores displayed a dazzling array of enticing goods, ready-made clothes, furniture, rugs, umbrellas, stationery, toilet paper, a cornucopia of foreign and domestic temptations. Prices were fixed and aligned with the middle classes, but even members of the working class might afford some items. Posters announced sales to draw more people into their stores as massive glass and iron emporiums. Glossy catalogs mailed to potential customers in other cities and the countryside encouraged people to order the practical goods and the luxuries of modern urban life for delivery by the new National Postal Services. As Figure 21.3 suggests, the stores became tourist attractions, places to spend leisure time, and leading promoters of consumption. This Parisian department store, with its dramatic central staircase, was designed like a theater for visitors as well as a building where a huge varieties of goods could be purchased. Men, women, and children, themselves on display as much as the goods for sale, stroll through this monument to prosperity. By 1900, more than 15,000 people passed through the doors of the Bon Marché in Paris every day. Equally amazing, this shopper's mecca was only one of 12 Parisian department stores. Together, employed almost 10,000 people. Department stores have become to represent the materialism of the cities. The new urban landscape. City life became the new norm for masses of people in the West. Many rural villages declined or died, slowly in some areas, quickly in others. People from outside the local community moved in, bought the land, and hired migrant laborers to work it. Residents flocked to the cities, and those who had established themselves stayed. An observer in 1899 reflected the experience of millions. The most remarkable social phenomenon of the present century is the concentration of populations in the cities. Europe's population ballooned from 270 million in 1850 to 450 million in 1914, and well over half of Western Europeans lived in cities. In Britain, only 8% of the workforce remained in the countryside. London, Europe's greatest urban center, grew from 2.5 million in 1850 to over 4.5 million in 1914. Rebuilding the cities. As these numbers multiplied everywhere, even the physical foundations of cities changed. Urban centers grew up, out, and grew beyond and below ground. Milan, the thriving Italian center described at the beginning of this chapter, was not the only city to rebuild. Governments, entrepreneurs, and speculators tore apart the centuries-old housing and winding streets in Paris, Vienna, Brussels, Stockholm, Barcelona, Cologne, and Mexico City. In place of these older features, they constructed broad, tree-lined avenues, parks, fashionable apartment houses, department stores, fancy cafes, government buildings, museums, hospitals, opera houses, schools, and libraries. New neighborhoods, open spaces, transportation systems, and underground water and sewer systems transformed the face of city life. Paris led the way in this wave of reconstruction. In the French capital, Emperor Napoleon III and his technocratic administrator, Baron Haussmann, initiated the most ambitious plans for demolishing some of the oldest and poorest neighborhoods. 21.4, in a crappy copy, shows just one of the many large projects begun in Paris during the 1850s. Here, workers tear down old tenements that line the streets of Paris to make way for wide boulevards, new buildings, and parks. According to Napoleon, Haussmann and their advisors, these reconstruction efforts offered several important benefits. Doctors and reformers argued that filth from overcrowding caused the diseases that often swept through Paris. Wide streets and open spaces, they explained, would let in much needed fresh air. But those wide streets also gave governments a political advantage. They deterred people from again throwing up revolutionary barricades to fight the forces of order, as they had in 1848, and afforded troops ready access to working class areas. Finally, reconstruction projects generated untold wealth for investors, speculators, influence brokers, schemers, architects, and big engineers, and workers from all over France. As in Milan, the new construction drove the poor out of the center of Paris to the East End or into working class suburbs. Wealthier Parisians felt little sympathy. After all, they reasoned the capital city represents the nation in the eyes of the citizens and visitors alike. As Haussmann explained, the splendor of the city reflects the whole country. The power, wealth, beauty, and modernity of Paris must not be marred by images of poverty and misfortune. Sewers and subways. Below Europe's city streets, less glamorous but no less important projects hummed along. In 1850, most houses in Europe's major cities did not have running water. Sewage in cities such as Berlin still ran in open gutters, creating an atmosphere of filth and tremendous stench. During the following decades, these standards began to change. First in London and then elsewhere, engineers and workers built water and sewer systems. Doctors, reformers, and planners led the drive to bring in fresh water and aqueducts or pipes from sources upstream, and to create hundreds of miles of underground sewers to carry waste downstream. These measures made urban life healthier and more comfortable than before. More than water and waste moved below the city, however. In 1863, London's Underground Railway opened. Over the next 50 years, Paris and New York built subways of their own. Along with carriages, trams, and railroads, the efficient, predictable subways enabled people to shop and work in places farther from home than ever. People moved their residences out of crowded urban centers to the fringes of the cities and suburbs, whether upscale neighborhoods for the middle class or less expensive area for the working